You know, I grew up on a farm, and so far, I can tell you with what I got to present tonight, I feel like what happened when we'd throw an ear of corn into the chicken coop, and the one chicken to come and get some corn, and another one run up and bite off some corn. Everybody that's presented, I think, up to this point has been pecking away at what I'm going to do this evening. And I don't appreciate it at all. But there's been some allusions to what we're doing, and so this stuff will not be all that, probably that different. One thing I do want to tell you as we go through this, whether it's this, whether it's me, whether it's Anthony, whether it's Joe, whether it's Tom, whether it's Dan, whoever's up here, and especially if it's Kathy, apply Acts 17:11 to anything. Now these were more noble-minded than those in Thessalonica, for they received the word with great eagerness, examining the Scriptures daily to see whether those things were so. We're presenting lots of ideas and lots of concepts. That doesn't ever mean that we're right, but it's where we might be at this particular point in our discovery process. And please allow us to change our mind the next time, just like some of the presidential candidates have been doing, you know. So I may change my mind. By this time next year, I may have a whole different thought process in this. But this is where I am this evening. And so I want to look at Daniel, the 2nd chapter. We're going to do it real fast. You're familiar kind of with the story. I want to get to the crux of the matter of Daniel 2. By the way, just before I start that, you know, Daniel, the book of Daniel, has taken a lot of hits. There are people who discredit the book of Daniel. They say that its accuracy is so uncanny that it could not have been written the 500 to 600 years before Christ that most people or many Bible scholars used to give it. And they say it must be something that was written during the time of the Maccabees, somewhere in there, and particularly because, you know, Antiochus Epiphanes is just too good a fit for some stuff there in the book of Daniel. And so they said it's got to be somebody during that time period did that. And so they said, and so it wasn't Daniel that wrote it. It was some unknown person. They have their ideas. Let me call your attention. Anthony's already read this scripture to make another point out of it earlier today. But let me make a point out of this in Matthew 24, verse 15. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which is spoken of through Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. That's enough said right there. Jesus said Daniel wrote it. He alluded to those prophecies. That's all we need to know. But they write big books about it. But this is all you need to know. That one verse, Jesus tells you that Daniel was a writer, and Daniel's prophecies are for us to study. So I just want to make that point before we go, because I think it's important when we look at this particular prophecy and the prophecies of Daniel. I do like the book of Daniel for a lot of reasons, but actually I don't like the ones. My favorite chapters are different than maybe some of you might guess. But anyway, we're going to skim through here. You're familiar with the dream. Nebuchadnezzar had a dream that disturbed him so much that he couldn't sleep. He had been out. He'd ate a lot of Mexican food. It kept him up. And he couldn't sleep. So he called in his magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, astrologers, and demanded they tell him what he had dreamed. This is interesting. This is really the test. If you look at the translation really, the newer translations kind of give you the real idea that's going here. This is the test he has for him. It's not from the interpreter dream. That was no big deal. If he told him the dream, then they'd give him some kind of interpretation. The way he was going to test this out, can you tell me the dream and give me the interpretation? And so that's an important key part that goes on here, because when the dream is revealed then later to Daniel. And of course, they're what can we do? You know, there isn't a man alive who can tell your majesty his dream. This is an impossible thing the king requires. No one except the gods can tell you your dream, and they do not live among the people. So Daniel wants to see the king. We're dropping down some verses now. And requested more time so he could tell the king what the dream meant. Daniel went home and told Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, which is Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, what happened. And he urged them to ask the God of heaven to show them his mercy by telling them the secret. That night the secret was revealed, and then Daniel praised God. So they went right home, got some people to work with him, pray with him, God revealing the dream. And so he goes back to the king, King Nebuchadnezzar, to tell him this dream. While your majesty was sleeping, you dreamed about coming events. The revealer of mysteries has shown you what is going to happen, because God wanted you to understand what you were thinking about. And so he tells him the dream about the statue. Your majesty, in your vision, you saw in front of you a huge and powerful statue of a man, shining brilliantly, frightening and awesome. The head of the statue was made of gold, his chest and arms were silver, his belly and thighs were bronze, his legs were of iron, and his feet were a combination of iron and clay. But as you watched, a rock was cut from a mountain by supernatural means. It struck the feet of iron, clay, smashing them to bits. The whole statue collapsed into a heap of iron, clay, bronze, silver, and gold. The pieces were crushed as small as chaff on the threshing floor, and the wind blew them all away without a trace. But the rock that knocked the statue down became a great mountain that covered the whole earth. So that's the crux of what he saw in the dream. And then he begins the interpretation. This is the dream. Now I will tell you, Your Majesty, what it means. Your Majesty, you are the king over many kings. You're the head of gold. No doubt what the head of gold is it? Right there. Bang. Okay. Head of gold is Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian kingdom. This was the extent of the Babylonian kingdom as it stretched down. I do have some maps in here. I'm going to show you. There have some inaccuracies, and you'll find this in maps and when you compare maps with actual facts, you find that people are pretty sloppy in their stuff, and you need to check stuff. Don't stop, because it's amazing the books and the textbooks and the things that are written today, how inaccurate a lot of this stuff is, and so you have to do some digging. But after your kingdom comes to an end, another kingdom inferior to yours will rise to take your place. So we have that which is the silver. And of course, later on in the book of Daniel, of course, we have the Medo-Persian Empire that comes along. In fact, it comes along at the end of chapter 5 and takes over. And so we have the silver. So that very night, Belshazzar, the Babylonian king, was killed, and Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62. That's what happened at the end of Daniel 5. Whoops, went too fast. I want to do it fast, but not that fast. The two-horned ram represents the kings of Media and Persia. We can collaborate that from later in the book of Daniel. Also, after that kingdom has fallen, yet a third great kingdom represented by bronze belly and thighs will rise to rule the world. And so we have that, the third one, which of course was the kingdom that was of Greece and Alexander's. The shaggy male goat represents the king of Greece, and the large horn between its eyes represented the first king of the Greek Empire. Now, as I studied Daniel 2, let me read this. Following the kingdom, there was a fourth great kingdom as strong as iron. The kingdom was smash and crush all previous empires, just as iron smashes and crushes everything it strikes. When I first was studying this back sometime Bible college days or right there shortly thereafter, everything I read had one straight interpretation. You couldn't find anything that deviated from it. But I got to admit to you that for some reason it kept gnawing at me that I wasn't comfortable with what they was telling me was the fourth kingdom. And so it bothered me for years, and I kept struggling with it. And I kept struggling. And then later on, as some things, strange series of things kind of came together to make me begin to understand some things that I thought, or at least put some things together that I thought made more sense to me. Well, one of the things was that I was doing a study and a presentation on the 7 churches of Revelation. Maybe some of you were at Christian Work Center one of the years that I did that. But when I was studying that, one of the things that struck me is how they kept referring to some of these churches as being on the Roman frontier. And they would have big garrisons there at some of those places because to hold back the people that were coming in. Okay, that was an interesting piece of information because I thought, for some reason in my mind, I had the Roman Empire going farther, east. The second thing that happened was I was doing a thing on Babylon. Maybe some of you remember that from Christian Worker Seminar. I done a thing on Babylon. When I was doing the thing on Babylon, one of the facts that came out is that there's two important cities in the Bible, and they're kind of the antithesis. You know, here's Jerusalem and here's Babylon. How much of stuff happens over here at Babylon? You know, right from Genesis right on through, you know, to where we are here. A bunch of stuff's happening in Babylon. And then you have Jerusalem. So I began to think, Jerusalem, Babylon. I think that whoever was controlling these two at the same time, those are the empires to look at. And so I began to think about that. Well, another thing came along because, you know, right after Alexander's empire, some people suggest, well, you know, but you got to have these 4 consecutive empires. You know, you got the Babylonian, you got the Medes and Persians, you got Greece, and then you got Rome. Trouble is, there's a big gap between the end of the Greek Empire of Alexander's and the beginning of the Roman Empire. You got a big gap. In fact, the important people is the Seleucids and the Ptolemies, who struggled back and forth during this time period over Jerusalem. And of course, out of the Seleucid kingdom, we get the Antiochus, who greatly influenced all this. And so I thought, why? And in the history books, they're called an empire. I thought that was interesting, but I was interesting from the standpoint is the question I had is, what is an empire? And so I went to somebody who I thought they held a doctorate, they were skilled in history, they were skilled in Bible, and I picked the most convenient time to ask them this question. We were standing right along the side of a grave after a graveside service, and so I walked up to him and I asked him, I said, what makes an empire an empire? I think that was a pretty simple question, don't you? What makes an empire an empire? Well, 25 minutes later, in 600 years, I still didn't have my answer. And I don't know if they ever would have given me an answer if we would have stood there for 2 days as to what makes an empire an empire. And so, but that began to work on me more and more as to what is an empire and how long do you have to hold on, or what territories do you have to have on, particularly for the prophecies that we're looking at. Now, much is made of the legs actually, but the thighs come down to the knees. And so we have these legs, and much has been made, of course. Well, it's got to be Rome because there's 2 divisions here. You got the Eastern Empire and the Roman Empire. Well, if all that stuff's going to mean anything, then let's go back up the statue and have a part up there mean something else too, you know? And if one of these legs is going to become the important leg later on, where a little horn's going to grow out or something like that, which leg is it going to be? Shouldn't one leg be bigger than the other leg? Huh? It ought to be a lot more muscular, and one of them is a little limp thing. I mean, I'm thinking about all this stuff, and you know, that doesn't make sense. And you know what really doesn't make sense? Is because most of the textbooks, this starts back with Schofield and Ironsides and people like that, when they would be putting this stuff together, the statue or the drawing that they used and made for the statue was a Roman soldier. Now, he wore a miniskirt compared to what a Persian soldier would have been wearing. His went all the way down to the ankles, the Persian soldiers did. The Roman soldiers, of course, his was about knee length, and so they was working with that one, so they had the legs exposed. Whereas in the dream that Daniel probably was interpreting, it was a Persian soldier that he was looking at, and he would have had it all the way to the ankles. That, I think, makes a significant difference also when I begin to put all this stuff together. Then I begin to think also, because you know what this runs to, then if this is Rome. And there were some early church fathers who thought it was Rome, but they was under the rule of Rome at the time. Later, when Protestant broke away from the Roman Catholic Church, they had to have the Catholic Church be the villain. So they began to piece together this whole thing backwards, that the Roman Church and Rome, and then that's the fourth kingdom. That way is the way. And so they had to make Rome and the Catholic Church, particularly the villain in all this, the extension of Rome. And then we get what? The European common market. And I can remember when the European common market, as it was called then, you know, it had 7 countries or something like that, where it's waiting for 10. We knew when they got to 10, that was the magic number. It zipped right past 10. You know, I don't even know how many we got today. 28, 29, 30. We've got a bunch. Now people are trying to get back out of it. You know? And so there was a difficulty with that also, I thought. And also, if you was looking for an Assyrian Antichrist, he's not going to come out of Europe, is he? So there were a lot of things began to play in my mind as I thought about this. And then, so I had a thought. It was now, every once in a while they do. They just flow through there and I get a thought. And I got a thought. I thought, who held the territory from Babylon to Jerusalem the longest? Now, if you look at maps, they'll still say that the Roman Empire at its height held Babylon. That's not true. They went down there on a 6-month excursion. They couldn't hold on to it. That's hence why they fell back into this territory here. See why? The Roman soldiers had to move quickly, and so they needed the waterway. This was too far inland for them to get their soldiers into and get them there quickly if something happened. And so they just held on to that which they could get their armies to very quickly, to the Mediterranean Sea. In fact, what do we find? That during the time of the Roman Empire, many of the Jews ran down to Babylon to get away from the Roman Empire, and hence we got what, the Babylonian Talmud during this time, and all this, a lot of stuff going on, big Jewish influence down in Babylon during this time. But also on the rise, of course, was this: the Arab Empire. And when we begin to study about who held on to this property the longest, it is the Arab Empire in one form or another, right down to the Ottoman Turks. It didn't take them long. All the Crusades went down there and did a couple things, and for a little while they was able to do this or that. But for the most part, for more than a millennium, they held on to both Jerusalem and Babylon. And they did, you know, you can see their huge influence that they have during this time period. In fact, right up until what? World War I. You know, and General Allenby marches in with his troops, and without a shot being fired, and it's done. Well, during our lifetime, until recently, they've not been a factor, have they? And so, again, that's why Rome seems to be the logical thing. They, after World War I, they kind of faded in the background. We just saw them with just nomads and no influence, never could get organized. Until one day somebody found a pool of oil and everything changed, you know? And so we have, again, and it's been on the rise ever since, and to what we see is going on today, and the influence that's going on today. And so I began to, in thinking about all that, I thought, again, you're the only person that I know of that believes that. Well, you know, that doesn't bother me as much as you think that it should bother me, because there's a lot of stuff I think that I probably believe or think differently than anybody else. If you're going to listen to me, you're probably going to get something that you never heard before, and you take it for what it's worth, you know? And so, but then while I was, we have our church on Saturday night, so on Sundays I go and attend different places. I fill in on pulpits a lot, but I was attending the church, the Greenville church, and Pastor Terry Farrell, was, he's 94 now, I think. Anyway, one day when in his sermon on Daniel 2, he said that the fourth empire was the Arab Empire. I thought, wow. So there's two of us. Now, we're still kind of peculiar, both of us. I understand that. But there's two of us. Then, while I was mulling that over, and before I got the chance to really talk to him about that, for some reason I was looking through Bullinger's Companion Bible. I was looking for something else entirely, and this is the way the great discoveries happen, isn't it? You're looking for something else, and boom, something jumps out. Bullinger, in his treating of Daniel, the 2nd chapter, says that the fourth kingdom is the Arab kingdom. Where has he been hiding all this time? I mean, a lot of people use the Companion Bible, but why didn't anybody ever pick up on that? Why wasn't that ever something that somebody told me that existed? So I'm still mulling all this stuff over, and then Brother Farrell says, you need to read when I finally got a chance to talk to him, you need to read this book called The Eastern Question by, what's his name? Wheatie. Right? Like Wheaties? No, not like the wheat tea. But Jan had it in her paper, at the end of her paper today, his name, and I couldn't remember. I just had to try remembering exactly how it was spelled. But he says he lays that all out. It's an old book. But it's, and you can download it, by the way, today. But it's an old book. I thought, well, that's really intriguing that he does that. And so I looked at what he had to say. But, so I began to look at all these things and think of this, and then I remembered an article about 40 years, or throughout that time, about 30 years previous to when I was studying this, an article called The Dominion. And I just looked briefly through that, and I thought, this is nuts. That's the way I thought at the time. I was a young guy, and I looked through it, and I said, this guy is way off. Well, I went back and dug it out of my files, because I never throw anything away. I got everything. By the way, Dan, that incident you was talking about in preaching class happened while I was there, so it had been your junior year. But I got all my critiques from preaching class even. And they were so good. These guys, they were tough. When you went to preaching class and these guys critiqued you, this stuff was tough. Of course, fortunately, I'm still around, aren't I? But nevertheless, in looking at this stuff, I began to think about the dominion. And I gave you the paper on that for you to look at yourself and read that. But it's very interesting because the Bible is so, sometimes the evidence is so plain that you miss it. I mean, the stuff is there, and all of a sudden one day you say, wow. And so when you start thinking about, we start talking about it's not the Garden of Eden, it's the Garden in Eden. It's a difference. The territory was huge. And so when you begin to read some of these scriptures, it begins to detail the territory. And so then when I put all these pieces together, who controlled the dominion, which included Babylon and Jerusalem, was the important people for us to look at. It's the way I began to piece all this together and feel that it was. So the feet and the toes you saw that were a combination of iron and clay show that this kingdom, is divided. This mixture shows that these kingdoms will try to strengthen themselves by forming alliances with each other through intermarriage. And so, you know what? They wouldn't cling together. The iron and the clay wouldn't. Isn't that a perfect description of the Muslim countries? They can't. The only thing, that's why we got fighting in Syria. That's why we got people moving up from Saudi Arabia. That's why we had the trouble in Iraq. They couldn't get along. And we got all this stuff happening. They can't get along with each other. The only thing that they can unite themselves together about is destroying Israel. That's it. That's their unifying factor. That's the only factor that puts them together. Nothing else. So Daniel's long-term predictions to Nebuchadnezzar were fulfilled. Babylon would fall. It did. To the Medo-Persia, 538 BC, Medo-Persia would fall. It did. To Greece, 331 BC, Greece would fall, and it did. To Rome in 168 BC, the Arabian Empire would break up and divide. So Daniel, it did. Daniel claimed, you remember after World War I, they divided all that property up. In fact, they started carving out territories, making new countries during that time. Daniel claimed that division would remain until the end of time. This strikes me then. Come, they said, let us wipe out Israel as a nation. We will destroy the very memory of its existence. This was their unanimous decision. They signed a treaty as allies against you, these Edomites and Ishmaelites, Moabites, Hagarites, Jebusites, Ammonites, Amalekites, and the people from Philistia and Tyre. Assyria has joined them too and has allied with the descendants of God. How many's there? 10. But the important part is this. Whether I'm right or not, that's not important. Because I could be wrong, and this is almost just stuff for you to take with you and think about. This is an alternative. In fact, I give you in the paper, I think there's another one. I throw it in because I read the book about that one. I don't know I don't give it much validity, but you might want to take a look at it. But in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom. Whoops. There. During the reigns of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed. No one will ever conquer it. It will shatter all these kingdoms into nothingness, but will stand forever. That is the meaning of the rock cut from the mountain by supernatural means, crushing to dust the statue of iron, bronze, clay, silver, and gold. The great God has shown your majesty what will happen in the future. The dream is true, and its meaning is certain, meaning it will happen. Considering the fact that the first 5 events have occurred in the sequence foretold, we can have confidence the 6th event, the coming of the everlasting kingdom, is sure to take place. For as the lightning cometh out of the east and shineth even to the west, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Christ's second coming, the Bible says it will be personal, visible, audible. I don't know why it keeps doing that. Glorious, and they're shaking. And the happenings on the earth, the righteous dead will be resurrected, the righteous living will be changed, the righteous will be gathered from the 4 winds, the righteous will meet Christ in the air, vengeance will happen to the wicked, 2 Thessalonians 1:7. Truly your God is the God of gods, the Lord over kings, the revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal this secret. Did Nebuchadnezzar believe God? I think he did. Okay, that's a run through it. So you take it from there. Thank you.